They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but when my billionaire husband stole my dead mother's $12 million and handed it to his mistress, I didn't get mad, I got strategic. He thought I was too heartbroken to notice. That was his first mistake. Before we dive into how I took back everything he stole, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. And drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Now, let me tell you my story. My name is Gabrielle Monroe, and 7 years ago, I married a man who made me feel like I'd won the lottery. Harrison Blake wasn't just wealthy, he was billionaire wealthy. The kind of man who owned a pharmaceutical empire that stretched across 3 continents. When he walked into a room, people straightened their backs and lowered their voices. And somehow, he chose me. A middle-class black woman from Newark whose mother worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep the lights on. I met Harrison at a hospital fundraiser where I was volunteering. He was the keynote speaker, writing a check that could have bought my childhood home 10 times over. We locked eyes across that ballroom, and 3 months later, he proposed with a ring that cost more than my college education. My mother cried at our wedding. She told me she was crying from happiness, but I think part of her was relieved that her baby girl would never struggle the way she did. For 7 years, I lived in a mansion in Connecticut with more rooms than I could count. I had staff, luxury cars, and closets full of designer clothes I barely wore. But here's the thing about marrying rich. You don't just gain wealth, you lose something too. Your independence, your identity, your voice. I became Mrs. Harrison Blake, and somewhere along the way, Gabrielle got lost in the marble hallways of that big empty house. But I was content. Harrison worked constantly, sure, but he was good to me. Or so I thought. He made the decisions about money because that was his world, not mine. He said it was easier if everything went through him. Tax efficiency, asset protection, all those fancy terms that made my head spin. And I trusted him. God, did I trust him? Then my mother died. Breast cancer. It took her in 6 brutal months, and I was there for every single one of them. She fought until the very end, and when she finally let go, I felt like someone had ripped my heart straight out of my chest. My mother was my hero. She raised me alone after my father left, worked herself to the bone, and still managed to save every penny she could. She invested in real estate back when nobody thought those Newark neighborhoods would ever bounce back. She took out life insurance policies and paid them religiously. When the lawyers read her will, I couldn't believe it. My mother, who clipped coupons and bought day-old bread, had left me $12 million. $12 million. I sat in that office and sobbed. Not because of the money, but because I realized my mother had sacrificed everything so I would never have to. Every double shift, every missed birthday party, every worn-out pair of shoes she refused to replace. It was all for me. Harrison held me while I cried. He was so supportive during those weeks. He handled all the paperwork, all the transfers, all the complicated financial stuff while I grieved. He suggested we put the inheritance into our joint account temporarily, just until we figured out the best investment strategy, he said. It would help with taxes, he explained, and I signed whatever he put in front of me because I was drowning in grief and he was supposed to be my partner, my protector. 3 months passed. Then 6. I tried to bring up my mother's money a few times, asking Harrison what we'd decided to do with it. He always had an answer ready. It was being held for the optimal investment opportunity. The market was volatile. We needed to wait for the right moment, and I believed him because, why wouldn't I? This was the man I'd pledged my life to. But then things started changing. Harrison became distant, cold. He took more business trips, sometimes for weeks at a time. When he was home, he barely looked at me. We stopped having dinner together. We stopped talking about anything real. I'd walk into a room and he'd walk out. It was like living with a ghost who resented my presence. I started noticing other things too. Strange withdrawals from our accounts. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. When I asked about them, Harrison would get irritated. He'd tell me not to worry about things I didn't understand. He'd remind me that he'd been managing billions long before I came along. And each time, I'd back down. I'd swallow my questions and retreat into silence because somewhere deep down, I'd started believing I didn't deserve to ask. Then came the charity gala. One of those black tie events where Connecticut's wealthy pretended to care about people like my mother for one night a year. I wore a silver gown and Harrison barely glanced at me. He spent the entire evening on his phone, texting someone and smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. That's when I saw her, this blonde woman in a red dress that probably cost more than a car. She was young, maybe 28, and she was wearing the most stunning diamond necklace I'd ever seen. It caught the light every time she moved, and something about it nagged at me. Then I remembered. 2 months earlier, I'd found a receipt from an exclusive jeweler in Harrison's jacket pocket, $45,000. When I'd asked him about it, he said it was a surprise for me. I never got that necklace. My friend Angela grabbed my arm. She leaned in close and whispered that the woman in red was Natasha Grant, Harrison's new executive assistant. The way Angela said assistant, with those air quotes in her voice, made my stomach drop. I watched Natasha across the room, watched how she touched her necklace, watched how she checked her phone, and smiled. And I knew. In that moment, I knew I hired a private investigator the next morning. His name was Frank, and he looked like every detective from every movie you've ever seen: rumpled coat, tired eyes, and a way of delivering devastating news like he was reading a grocery list. It took him 2 weeks to compile the report, and when he handed me that folder, he actually looked sorry for me. The affair had been going on for 2 years. 2 years. Harrison had bought Natasha a penthouse condo in Manhattan. He was giving her $50,000 a month as an allowance. There was a luxury car registered in her name. Vacations to places he'd told me were business trips. But the worst part, the part that made me physically sick, was the $8 million. $8 million from my mother's inheritance had been transferred directly into Natasha's investment portfolio. Another $2 million had been spent on gifts, travel, and expenses for her, my mother's money. The money she'd earned by sacrificing her health, her time, her entire life. Harrison had given it to his mistress like it was nothing, like my mother's legacy was just another toy he could hand to whatever woman caught his attention that week. I confronted him that night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked into his office, dropped the folder on his desk, and asked him to explain. And you know what he did? He didn't even try to deny it. He leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eye, and shrugged. He told me I was overreacting, that it was his money to manage as he saw fit. When I reminded him it was my inheritance, he laughed. Actually laughed. He said once it went into our joint account, it became marital property, and according to our prenup, I'd signed away my rights to any assets acquired during the marriage. Then he said the thing I'll never forget. He said maybe if I'd been more appreciating, more attentive, more interesting, he wouldn't have needed to find company elsewhere. He blamed me for his betrayal. I stood there in silence. Every instinct told me to scream, to throw something, to break down. But I didn't. I smiled. I thanked him for his honesty, and I walked out of that office while he sat there looking confused. That smile wasn't forgiveness. It was a promise. The next morning, I called Lorraine Foster, the best divorce attorney in the state. She was a black woman in her 50s with a reputation for destroying powerful men in court. When I told her my story, she leaned forward and said 4 words that changed everything. Separate property means leverage. Lorraine explained that my mother's inheritance should have remained my separate property. The moment Harrison transferred it without my explicit, informed consent, especially if he forged any documents or misrepresented what I was signing, he'd committed fraud, and fraud invalidates prenuptial agreements. Suddenly, Harrison's arrogance had given me an opening, but Lorraine warned me, if we were going to do this, we had to do it right. No emotional outbursts, no tipping him off. I had to stay in that house, play the dutiful wife, and gather every piece of evidence I could find. So that's exactly what I did. For 3 months, I became someone I didn't recognize. I smiled at Harrison across the breakfast table. I asked about his day. I pretended everything was fine while I systematically documented his betrayal. I accessed our shared financial accounts and downloaded 7 years of statements I had Frank continue surveillance, building a timeline of every meeting, every gift, every moment Harrison spent with Natasha. I found emails where Harrison explicitly told Natasha that his boring wife would never notice the money missing. I discovered he'd forged my signature on at least 3 transfer documents. And then I found something even bigger. Harrison had been embezzling from our family charitable foundation, the one we'd established, in my mother's name after she died. He'd been funneling foundation money into shell companies he controlled, then using that money to fund his lifestyle with Natasha. He'd stolen from sick children and struggling families, and he'd done it using my mother's name. I also made some calls to an accountant friend who specialized in tax law. Turns out, those monthly $50,000 payments to Natasha were unreported gifts. Harrison owed massive gift taxes to the IRS, and Natasha owed income taxes on money she'd been spending freely. My accountant friend helped me file an anonymous tip to the IRS with all the documentation they'd need. The final piece came from Connecticut's one-party consent law. I could legally record conversations without Harrison knowing. So I did. I recorded him bragging to a friend about how he'd moved my inheritance before I could waste it on helping poor people. I recorded him mocking me, calling me naive and stupid for trusting him. I recorded everything. 3 months of evidence, 3 months of playing weak while I built an arsenal. And then I struck. I had Harrison served with divorce papers at his office during a full board meeting. The look on his face when that process server walked into his conference room was worth every sleepless night. But I didn't just file for divorce. I filed criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. I filed a restraining order preventing him from accessing or transferring any more funds. And somehow, just somehow, the media got wind of it all. A billionaire pharmaceutical executive stealing his dead black mother-in-law's money to fund his affair? That's a headline that writes itself. Everything unraveled so fast. Harrison's company stock dropped 15% in 2 days. The board launched an internal investigation. Federal prosecutors started asking questions about the foundation. And Natasha, beautiful Natasha in her designer clothes and luxury condo, she panicked. She hired her own lawyer and immediately turned on Harrison. She provided my legal team with text messages where Harrison had promised her that I was too stupid to ever find out. She admitted he'd told her the money was his to spend however he wanted. She threw him completely under the bus to save herself from the IRS investigation. The prenup was thrown out due to fraud. Harrison was facing criminal charges that could mean prison time. His company was threatening to remove him as CEO. His reputation was destroyed. Every newspaper in the state was running stories about the billionaire who betrayed his grieving wife. He had no choice but to settle. I got my full $12 million back, plus interest. I got another $15 million in the settlement. I got the Connecticut mansion that I immediately sold because I never wanted to step foot in it again. And I got my freedom. As for Natasha, the IRS came after her hard. She had to liquidate most of her assets to pay back taxes and penalties on all those unreported gifts. The penthouse was in Harrison's name anyway, so she lost it. Harrison cut her off completely to try and save himself. Last I heard, she was working as an actual assistant somewhere, drowning in debt and scandal. Her Instagram used to be full of designer bags and tropical vacations. Now it's private. Harrison lost his CEO position. The board forced him out. He paid millions in fines and restitution to the foundation. He avoided prison, but barely. His net worth dropped from billions to millions. Last I heard, he's living in a modest condo in Florida, doing consulting work. The man who once commanded boardrooms now pitches ideas to companies that used to beg for his approval, and me? I established the nursing foundation I'd always dreamed of, named after my mother. We help women escape financial abuse. We teach financial literacy in underserved communities. We provide scholarships for nursing students who come from nothing, just like my mother did. I turned my mother's sacrifice into something that helps hundreds of women. Every year I found peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from designer clothes or marble floors, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself. From knowing that when someone tried to break you, you broke them right back. People ask me if I'm angry, if I'm bitter. And the truth is, I'm not. Harrison taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. He taught me that trust without verification is just foolishness. He taught me that my voice matters, my questions matter, and my money matters. He taught me that sometimes the people who promise to protect you are the ones you need protection from. My mother used to tell me something when I was little. She'd say, "Baby, never let anyone steal what's yours. Not your money, not your dignity, not your peace. And if they try, you make them pay for every penny." I didn't understand what she meant back then, but now I do. Harrison thought my smile meant I was weak, that I was broken, that I'd just accept his betrayal and fade away quietly, but that smile meant I was counting every dollar, every lie, every piece of evidence I needed to take back what was mine. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say justice is a dish best served with receipts, lawyers, and a paper trail that can't be denied. So that's how I turned his betrayal into my freedom. My mother always said, "Baby, never let anyone steal what's yours." And I didn't. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, should I have taken him for more? And if this story fired you up, smash that like button and share this video with every woman who needs to hear it. Subscribe because I've got more stories about people who underestimated the wrong one. Remember, they can betray you, but they can't beat you if you're smart about it. I'm Gabrielle, and I'll see you in the next one.